Okay, welcome everybody to the Policy Development Strategic Direction Committee for Tuesday, July the 12th, 2022. We have two regrets, Joan Gatward and Brian Coleman. Otherwise, I think everybody else is in attendance. Welcome. Could we have a approval for the agenda, noting that we have, we'd like to move the fireworks bylaw updates for consideration under 10.1 to 9. Consideration. We have a mover and a second. Moved by John Pierce, second by Steve House, Councillor House. Okay, all in favor? Oh, do we have
Well, I was going to add something under other business, if that's okay, before we call the vote.
Okay. Is there anybody else who'd like to add anything to new business? Well, as amended, all in favor? Passed. Okay, a declaration of pecuniary interest. Any right? Seeing none. Moving on to delegations, petitions, and presentations. We have Marilyn Love online. You would like to talk about council remuneration. We have a recommendation. Somebody, would we move the recommendation?
No, there's a report later in the agenda.
We'll move that later. Okay. Marilyn, if you'd like to make your presentation.
Marianne on Zoom, are you ready for your presentation?
I am, and I thought you're going to put it up on your end. Is that you, Heather? Thank you. Okay, good evening, Council. I'm here to just provide a brief sort of overview of the Council compensation review that I conducted for Council this year, and if someone could advance the slides. So I'll just walk through it, and I'm happy to take questions at the conclusion of the presentation if that works for you. So this is the background. We last reviewed council remuneration in 2018, and that council remuneration established by bylaw. We have 2022 base pay for County of Brant elected officials is set out on the slide. Mayor at 91,361, councillor at 33,200. Health, dental, and benefit plans is 100% premium paid. There's a kilometerage expense that's equivalent to the staff rate, and the mayor receives a $3,000 annual car allowance. There is an annual conference budget, which is allocated $6,000 for mayor and $3,250 for councillor. An iPad is provided to all elected officials. The laptop and cell phone are provided to the mayor. And base pay is adjusted, I understand, on an annual basis at the same percentage rate as approved for the management non-union staff salaries. In terms of just an overview, summary of the 2022 base pay remuneration for the Brant elected officials is low to the defined pay market. In regard to the comparator group identified, other elements of compensation are generally comparable. I believe that the comparator group is representative. It's based on select criteria, and the 50th percentile is reasonable. And I'll take the next slide. In terms of the approach, I prepared a custom market survey using 10 comparator municipal data from 10 municipal comparator organizations. Staff collected the data, and I was able to analyze it and bring forward summary results. The comparator group was selected in regard to defined scope and criteria, and you see those on slide here. This would be similar criteria that would be used when we did the management non-union review. In fact, we used the comparators. Many of those comparators used for that past review. The comparator group is shown in Appendix A to this report, and we'll get to that as we work through the rest of the slides. The comparators are shown based on some size metrics. We're looking at population, some operating expenses, both with service, median income, so there's some information there. All the comparators listed were included in the 2018 market review. The County of Wellington and Prince Edward County were not included in the 22 review. These municipalities were viewed back in 2018 as the high and low outliers. And so we did not bother bringing those forward for the 22 review. The county of Brant's relatively placed within the comparator group, having regard to its size indicator. As I said, staff collected the data and I was able to analyze it. Our comparator base pay was then is shown in Appendix B. The base pay comparative statistics were calculated. That's shown in the Appendix C. There's a way to read these comparative statistics, and basically where we're seeing a percentage difference beside a percentile value, it's the amount by which we would have to increase our County of Brant elected official positions in order to meet that defined target. So when we're looking at targets, the mayor's base pay rate is 8.8% below the market median, or the 50th percentile. It's the same thing. And the 2022 base pay ranges for elected for mayors in our comparator group range from 67,733 to 118,450 for 2022. Councilors are 11.1% below market median, or the 50th percentile, and the ranges for council positions range from 25,393 to 55,869. Overall, when we talk about percentile targets, it's basically a measure of how our positions are ranked in the comparator group, highest to lowest, and the 50th percentile would be the dollar rate, where the 50% of the base pay rates in the comparator organizations are below the amount, and 50% or above. It's also, as I said, known as the median. And we tend to talk about percentiles, as we did with the management non-union group when we're looking at how we fare to the comparable market. And in terms of, as I was mentioning earlier, I think that the 50th percentile at this point is a reasonable pay target, having regard to Brant's relative placement within the group. All of the comparators report that they adjust their base pay rates annually by a CPI metric, or the same base pay rate as applied to the management non-union grid. There is one comparator that provides an annual stipend of $5,000 for workload that's associated with appointment to various boards and committees. There are no other comparators that report a meeting per diem stipend. 9 of the 10 comparators report that they have access to group benefit plan coverage or payment in lieu of benefits. 2 of those comparators provide the offering with payment of premium by the elected official. 1 comparator or 4 comparators pay 100% of the premium. 1 provides group benefits on a co-pay basis, and 2 provide an option for coverage 100% paid by municipality or payment in lieu. And those amounts are shown. 3 of the comparators are reporting a meal allowance for attendance at conferences and seminars, and 3 are reporting that they provide an annual car allowance for the mayor. Those allowances range from 5,396 to 6,000 annually. 1 comparator reports they provide a car for the mayor, and 2 comparators provide a car allowance for councilors, and those amounts are 1,000 and about 1,600 respectively. Kilometerage reimbursement is prevalent amongst the comparator group, and that reimbursement ranges from 55 cents per kilometer to 59. All comparators report providing a laptop, iPad, or an allowance. So this is somewhat different than previous reviews, and of course it's, I think, as a result of COVID and a requirement clearly to have to work differently through, conducting the business of council. 3 comparators provide cell phone for the mayor only, and 5 provide cell phones for mayor and council. 4 of the 10 comparators are providing overage pension enrollment, so it's not a preponderance, but 40% of the group. Common practice in the sector is to review council remuneration once during the term of council, and typically revised base pay rates are implemented during the next term of council, so it's a go forward. Council base pay is typically determined by a customized market survey and a percentile target of the comparator group, just as we've talked about here. It's also common practice to increase the annual base pay for elected official positions annually by an amount used to adjust the management non-union salary grid. And what this does is basically allows for a year-over-year increase to align with cost of living increases, and it's also supported by the survey results. It mitigates large adjustments during cyclical reviews. In conclusion, the annual base pay for the mayor and council positions is low to the defined pay market at all percentile targets. I tested the 50th percentile, the 55th, and the 60th. So clearly, if we're low to the 50th, we're going to be low to the higher targets. Other elements of remuneration are generally comparable, and the market comparator group, as I mentioned earlier, in the 50th percentile base pay or targets, I think are reasonable and conservative at this point. And things may change as the organization takes a look, at the management non-union group. There may be some different percentile targets in the future, and at that point, we'll be able to reflect upon that for the next council review. But at this point, it seems a reasonable target with reasonable results. In terms of recommendation, I'm recommending the council consider that, effective January 1st, 2023, that the base pay for the elected official positions be increased based on the 50th percentile of the comparable 22 market rates, and adjusted by a percentage adjustment applied to the management group for January 1st, 2023. For example, what I wanted just to reiterate, all of this work was done in 2022. If we're moving this forward into 2023, we need to make an economic adjustment to these base pay rates that you're seeing here. The 50th percentile values for 2022 for mayor is 99,432, and for councilors 36,929. I'm also recommending that the county continue to adjust base pay for elected official positions annually by the same percentage adjustment provided to the non-union employee group, that the county continue the practice of conducting a market review during the last term of council, and that, and I understand implementation costs will be subject to, or are subject to a separate staff report. And these last few slides are basically just the source data. So here's the market comparator slide, and there's some metrics on here that relate to size and scope of the comparators, and you see branches up top, and we have the others that are listed. As I said, these are the same comparators that we ultimately used in the 2018 review. In the next slide, this is your comparator-based pay that was reported. Each one of the municipalities for both the mayor and the councillor positions. You'll see County of Brant, in terms of 2022 base pay, is reported at top. This slide is showing the base pay the market survey results based on annual base pay. You can see there's 10 observations, meaning 10 comparators. And you can see the market median result, and you can see the percentage differential to the right of that market median value. And of course, as we move across to the right and we're looking at higher percentile targets amongst that group, of course, those base pay values are getting larger. And I've just recommended at this point that we are focusing on the P50 value, or the 50th percentile value, which you can see about one third into the slide. And I think that may conclude the appendices. And that pretty much takes care of my 10 minutes. And I'm happy to open that up for questions through you, Mayor.
Councillor LaFerrier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering through you to the presenter. You said that in the document that the 50th percentile was conservative and reasonable. Would you consider the 55th percentile to be conservative and reasonable as well, or not so much?
Well, through you, Mayor, I think that's a very fair question. I don't think the 55th is that far off. However, I understand that's not where our management non-union is. I think typically council will tag and align with targets that are established for a management non-union group. I'm not saying that 55th is not unreasonable. I'm saying 50th is reasonable and conservative. I don't think the 50th percentile target, and actually if we could just move the slide to appendix, I think C, you'll see the numbers. You move the report, please. Down to appendix C, and you'll see the numbers, and they're not far off. So I really think it's council's, thank you. I think it's up to council. Council can make that determination, and really this is a go forward exercise. This is the recommendation anyway, is to move this forward into the next term. And I would imagine it could be in the mind of council that this would be it for that term of council. So you may want to consider somewhat higher percentile, but I would say no less than the 50th percentile. And if you moved a little bit higher to the 55th, it would not be far wrong.
Yeah, and I only bring that up, Mr. Chair, because I know municipally with our group, we've had discussions about the difficulty in hiring and retaining municipal employees. And I am seeing in the sort of lack of folks applying to run for council, I wonder if this is a factor there as well, where we're not seeing the same number of folks at the same time in the term as we saw last time. Just food for thought, but if that's what's been happening municipally with municipal workers, I wonder if people running for council, it's the same sort of idea.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to the presenter, Marianne. The 10 observations that you referenced in Appendix C, are those the 10 in Appendix B that you've listed?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are, Councillor.
So if I look at Appendix B, you have Haldeman County, you have a councillor at 55,869. My first thought would be that seems pretty high, but my understanding is that they don't have 11 at their council table. Is that correct? They have 6 councillors and the mayor. Do you know how many they have?
That data, I'm sure, is in the source data. I just don't have it at the ready in terms of the presentation on deck, Councillor.
Okay. My question to you, my next question would be, have you broken it down somewhere, the cost of elected officials per resident? And how does Brant, because I would be interested in that data. I like I say, I understand, I don't know, to me, I think there would be value in that, just looking at it, because like I say, if there's less counselors, there's more of a load to carry because there's more committees, right, to sit on and whatnot. So that would be the information I'd be, I guess if you don't have it, you don't have it. So, okay, thank you.
Councillor Howes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to our presenter. My question, it's a small detail, but I was listening to your presentation related to the different vehicle reimbursement programs for mayors. It seems, I see our mayor traveling around the county a lot, and we have a big chunk of geography to cover, but am I mistaken, or is mayor's vehicle compensation low compared to the median of the group that you analyzed?
Could you just, if whoever's got the slide, is that you, Heather? If you could move to the deck, just to where we can see that, where we've got, it would be, I can help you find the page if you want. All right, I see that in terms of mayor's allowance is 3,000, and I believe the mayor's allowance was, you may not find it, but I think it was 5,000 to 6,000. There it is. So it may not be, it may be lower, but I guess what I took from this is it's not prevalent. Only 3 of the 10 are providing a car allowance for the mayor. So if we look if we're amongst that group, so if you say, if we put ourselves into the fold, we become the 11th. There are 4 out of 11 that are providing car allowances, and there's no doubt of the 4, we are the lower. So it's something council may wish to consider, but as I said, car allowances in and of themselves are not prevalent. So council may take a view that, well, if the fact that we are providing one, we want to be closer to the range of 5396 to 6,000. That would be a determination that council may wish to make.
Follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the breakdown, but it does seem to me that seems unbalanced. There's 3 municipalities who are giving car allowances, 4th municipality providing a car. Seems to stand out that we're not sticking to the 50th. And I understand you've explained it, but I think out of fairness, in a municipality that has this geographic coverage and the necessity of a lot of car travel, that's something we should be looking at whenever it's appropriate. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? We do have a recommendation that the presentation of Aaron Love Consulting be received as information and the matter be referred to staff report. 9.4, council remuneration update. Do we have a mover? Okay, mover Councillor Bell, second by Councillor Wheat. All those in favor? We'll tackle some of those things in the future. Adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting. Do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Miller, second by Councillor Wheat. Any comments? All in favor? Oh,
Who chaired the last meeting?
that would be
It
me.
doesn't say on the minutes. Is it you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Noted. Okay, all those in favor? Passed. Business rising from the meeting minutes? Anything? No. Consent items to be approved? 8.2. Moving on to staff reports, 9.1. So we also have the 10.1 communications to be considered at this point as well. And this is RPT 02248/22 fireworks bylaw amendment. Greg Bergeron. Would you like to make some comments, Greg? I believe you're online.
Thank you. Good evening to the committee through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this report is pretty straightforward. We are making attempts to modernize our fireworks bylaw. It has some language to update some of the regulations that have been changed provincially and federally. Some additional recommendations in relation to noise. Just some general changes essentially to the bylaw as it relates to the discharging of fireworks during the designated holidays. We are trying to shorten up those time periods. Additional requirements for family fireworks just to make things a little bit safer and have some clearer language for the residents. So a number of proposals that are in this report, and I won't go through them all, but I'm certainly here to answer questions for the committee if they have any questions or comments, or please feel free.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of questions for Greg. First of all, thanks for spending time on this. It is a hot topic in our community. We have people who love fireworks and we have people who hate fireworks, and almost in equal measure. So, and I appreciate the compromise afforded by the reduction. You know, we can still have fireworks, but we have not, we're reducing the amount of days where they can happen. I think that's a good recommendation. My questions for you, and we're going to get into this in the next section, but I wanted to ask it here too. The subject of silent fireworks comes up, and it was mentioned by one of our residents who wrote in, and I don't believe that there are a lot of silent fireworks available. There are the lanterns that float through the air, which we understand have some hazardous issues and are prohibited. But I'm wondering if your research has, in looking into the fireworks issue, saw any increase in availability of silent fireworks, if that's something we might look to in the future. And in a somewhat related second question, you know, we're allowing for fireworks for Victoria Day and Canada Day. However, we have a more diverse population here, and I know that I noticed in parts of Paris last November, we had families celebrating Diwali, and which involves lighting of candles, lighting of, it's a celebration of light, I believe, and there are sometimes fireworks related to that that event, which is not the same date every year, my understanding. I'm just wondering if you've had any chance to research into that, and if there's an opportunity now or in the future to create an allowance for people where that's important to them. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. Through you, Mr. Chair. So part one of your question in relation to silent fireworks, I did do a literature review as indicated in the report. I think it's a bit of a misconception when you say silent fireworks. I don't think the technology is there yet, particularly when you're discharging something into the air and it's dispersing in the air. There is some type of fireworks that have lower decibel levels. However, it's misleading, as I mentioned, because they are not completely silent. I did read the article about the town in Italy that adopted this. It's a vague article if we're speaking about the same article that the constituent brought forward. It does speak about silent fireworks, but from what I understand and from what I've been reading is silent fireworks is more related to the type of fireworks that are being discharged. For example, it's more ground related fireworks, like those spinning wheels and things that are discharged into the air and exploding. So that's what I found through my literature review. Another challenge with having silent fireworks would be for the county would be that we would have to have a little more control in the supply chain, and we would have to have like a more robust inspection requirements for the vendors. I just don't think that right now silent fireworks are commonplace in the market. Although they are available, I just don't have information on how widespread they are being used. And for the additional holidays, there was some consideration that was brought forward, and certainly something that we could add to the bylaw if we want to include Diwali, for instance. And I believe that that's the one of the holidays that we are talking about. I believe that it's on the third day of Diwali, and I believe that discharging is in October at some point. And I have seen it incorporated in other bylaws, and it's certainly something that we could incorporate into our bylaw should Canadian Council want to do that.
Okay, follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we continue this discussion tonight on this topic, I would like to see staff look at a way to include Diwali into the allowable, I guess make a third set of dates that it's allowable within our community. I think it's important and fair, and my understanding, and I don't fully understand all the details related to it, but I think it's more about light than it is about noise. That said, there were fireworks going off for Diwali last fall, and but I would like to see us add this in to our bylaw. Does that require a motion?
Yeah, I think it would be an amendment.
An amendment. I'm prepared to make that motion if for the amendment, if anyone would second that.
We have a seconder for that? A second by Mark Ferry, Councilor Ferry. So, okay, is there any other, we'll come back to that a little further. Is there any other questions or comments? Mayor Bailey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, for someone, I've lived in the Netherlands, as well as Councillor Bell has lived in the Netherlands. And on New Year's Eve, it's a big deal for the Dutch to gather on the street and have street parties, and it's all about fireworks. So just noting that we have such a population in the county of Brant, very specific pods of people from Burford to St. George and all kinds of other places, but mostly in sort of Burford and St. George. What happens when they do that? They on New Year's Eve gather as families and as communities and have firecrackers. They do it. Everyone knows they do it. The only thing they're celebrating is New Year's Eve. So how would you fit that into the bylaw?
Do you have a comment on that, Greg?
Yes, I do, through you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding of the Explosives Act and the regulations around that are that generally firework or firecrackers are prohibited. They're actually listed as a prohibited firework. However, you can seek permission through the federal government to obtain permission to discharge them. That, I suppose that's something we could work into the bylaw, but generally speaking, you need permission from the federal government to obtain those and discharge them.
With Councillor Miller.
Speaking to the report, not the amendment that's on the table. I guess in the States, there was quite a few cities, larger cities, where they had fireworks constantly during the lockdowns from COVID. So it's an issue, but I guess it's all relative. My question through you, Mr. Chair, to Greg, any thoughts on maybe not allowing fireworks during a fire ban? Because when I read your report, if I read the bylaw, there's just all kinds of talk about fire hazards, setting fires, liability insurance. So obviously fires and fireworks, there's a bit of a relationship there. So just any thoughts, Greg, on maybe not having fireworks during a fire ban?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I completely agree. I did reach out to Fire earlier this afternoon just to see what type of messaging that they relay when there is a fire ban, and if they, generally include fireworks in that. But it's certainly something that we can incorporate into the bylaw itself. It would certainly be a lot clearer for the residents.
Just to follow up, then, just to be clear. Through you, Mr. Chair, there are other bylaws, like in other municipalities, where they do prohibit them, correct? During a fire ban?
Yes, that's correct.
I will, thank you, Greg. Through you, Mr. Chair, I would like to make an amendment one time.
Councillor Chambers.
Even my microphone's not working apparently. I'm surrounded now. This is really important. Everybody has to hear what I have to say, obviously. I'll use this one. I'll start from scratch. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Greg. Is there a provision in the bylaw for an exemption to the bylaw by request at the approval of council?
No, that, through you, Mr. Chair, that has not been incorporated into the bylaw. I think we've left the authority for exemptions and permits to the chief fire official.
And just to comment to that, if there was the possibility for an exemption by approval of council, that may take into consideration not only the Dutch celebration, the Wally celebration, etc. So that may be an alternative to picking each celebration that traditionally uses fireworks and adding them to the bylaw on specific days. So that's a suggestion. And another question, in terms of enforcement, fireworks usually happens at night, and I can anticipate a call to a councillor from someone complaining about their neighbor lighting off fireworks at 10 o'clock at night. And if that happens, who do I call? And how does that become enforcement?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to your first part, to Councillor Chambers, I can say that the bylaw certainly has provisions in it for residents to apply for permits for display fireworks or family fireworks that are outside of the permitted holidays. So certainly that is available to the constituents in the county. And as for the second portion of it, it certainly is difficult to enforce that bylaw, particularly when we receive a complaint and we have no information on the location. We often rely on, the residents to pinpoint the location if possible. Oftentimes, it's their next door neighbor that is doing it, and if they're willing to come forward and provide the information, we certainly follow up with enforcement on that. As for the other one, you can contact the OPP after hours for them to investigate. Not certain, depending on the call volume, that they can attend. They answer calls in a priority sequence, but certainly, that would be, the number or the information that we would give to the residents if they want some action after hours. Otherwise, it's kind of left to be investigated after the fact for follow-up for the municipal law enforcement officers. And we are proposing to increase the set fines. I think what we're trying to achieve here is to catch the bad actors, the people that are discharging fireworks, that are not anywhere near or during the designated holidays. And sometimes they're discharging them at 2, 3 in the morning. So those are certainly the people that have caused concern in the county and caused concern for some of the residents.
Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Greg. Greg, I'm looking at page 6 of your report. It's the updated requirements for family fireworks. Seem to make good logical sense, but it rather limits the places where you can let off fireworks in town. If you need a minimum clear area of 30 metres by 30 metres, and you need to keep people at least 20 metres away, is this a standard which we've taken from a provincial document or some other municipality, or have we thought this one out for ourselves? It seems quite onerous, but quite appropriate.
Certainly. So this is not provincial regulation that I'm aware of. It's something that's been vetted and sent to our fire prevention officers and the fire chief. They are in agreement. They believe that fireworks, there's a time and a place and a location for them. It is onerous. I agree. I do see that we are trying to minimize the impact on the area residents. We also want to have safe communities. So we do see, some of the intensive housing that's occurring in the county. And, we obviously have concerns when people are discharging fireworks on very small lots. And so I think that's one of the regulations that we are proposing to use to try and curtail some of the issues that we are experiencing, and to try and curtail some of the noise issues that are being reported to us. That's certainly a recommendation at this point, and if the community sees fit and they want to forge ahead, that's certainly their prerogative, and if not, that's also their prerogative.
It just seems like, if I looked at the last 3,000 houses that have been built in Paris, none of them would qualify. So I wonder, should we not take it to the next stage and say no fireworks on domestic properties? And why didn't we do that? What was the reasoning behind it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe the reasoning is strictly for fire safety and some of the concerns that have been reported to fire and to bylaw about having debris on your neighbor's roof. There's been some documented instances where fireworks have caused fires. So I think that was the rationale behind that, is just to try and promote safety and try and deal with the noise issues.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Greg, I'm supportive of that. I'm just actually going a few steps further. That just if you translate the set of requirements, there's virtually no place in the south end of Paris that could actually fireworks legitimately. So should we just not accept that and say all fireworks, if they're for family purposes, it's got to be done in some kind of open park area for which you would probably need a permit?
I guess there's some urban residents, countryside that would have property. That
I
would be
agree.
commercial.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm thinking more about the town.
Yeah.
You know, if you're worried about fireworks landing on a roof somewhere, then in town that's where it will happen.
Mhm.
So I would actually just ask staff to think a little bit further about the implications of having fireworks allowed in any of our densely or heavily populated residential areas.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, further to that point, and like the average family does not have a backyard that's 90 feet by 90 feet.
Yeah.
And we don't want people setting off family fireworks in their neighborhood park. And I'm wondering, so my question for Greg is there an opportunity within our bylaw to make it necessary for retailers of fireworks to post these details in their stores, so that when somebody's going to buy $100 worth of fireworks, they're seeing this list of criteria that tells them that basically bylaw is going to could show up at your door if you're setting them off in the average backyard in town.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the answer to that is yes, of course, we could certainly do that. I'm sure we could come up with some documents and require them to post. We just have to put it in the bylaw. But, you know, having the bylaw posted for the vendors is a requirement in the bylaw. You know, but we could certainly piggyback on that and have, you know, some information that's more detailed and formatted and condensed so that, you know, people purchasing people purchasing fireworks will have access to that information. It's certainly doable.
Okay, I think that would be a good idea, and you know, we have a great communications team within the county. There will certainly be a need for reminders of some of these bullet points in the weeks leading up to any legal firework dates. But that in the back of our minds too. Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Really, just to follow up on what I said earlier, and if we were to ban fireworks in towns, let's forget our urban, rural areas for a moment, then my proposal would be that we as a county conduct a firework display that is properly managed in an appropriate area, like at the fairgrounds, for example. And I say that because that's exactly what happened when I lived in both England and Scotland. That personal fireworks were definitely not recommended, and rather larger public displays led by a municipality or a charitable organisation took their place. And I'd be happy to make an amendment to that effect if somebody would second it at the right time.
Okay. Mayor Bailey. Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, and maybe this is to you, but I see 4 or 5 amendments at the table. Should we maybe defer this to the next cycle so that we can get a report back with all this input?
I was kind of.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, we've had a lot more feedback on this than we anticipated. I'm quite concerned with the suggestion that, you know, at this table in the middle of July, we're going to start coordinating large-scale municipal fireworks events, because there's quite a bit of capacity. I used to be in that business, in the Parks and Rec business, and there's a lot of capacity attached to those things. So I would suggest you defer the report, ask staff to consider the council's feedback and to make appropriate amendments. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. Councillor Miller.
Just one comment, and Councillor Chambers hurt me on that one. Because Councillor House mentioned Diwali. To me, I think if you're picking one, you might want to think about other. I don't know if you want to it just opens it up, and maybe they apply for a permit or something. Just again, to put in, but there's events that occur annually, and then there's also events that occur not annually, like on anniversaries, for example, the Queen's Jubilee or the 100th anniversary of this battle. So people will be setting off fireworks, maybe you don't know about it, but for different events. So to just nail it to 3 days, yeah, it might be problematic, but to pick one other one, I don't know if that's good either. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Councillor Chambers.
Can you hear me on this one? Okay, good. Just a comment and to pick up on what Councillor Bell is saying in the urban areas. You have to be cognizant as well in the rural areas. Fireworks can be very, very dangerous if they're done in the wrong place. There may be no houses around, but there's a rye field, for example, that can go up in flames and not be stopped at this time of year, at Canada Day. And I wouldn't want to see a ban in the urban areas, and that moves them out into the rural areas where it is extremely dangerous as a fire hazard in places where people may not suspect that. And as well in the rural areas, if Councillor Coleman was here, or if there's horses, horses can be very, very nervous when they hear loud noises, and it can in the rural areas, there's a lot of horses as well, and family pets as well. Some pets have problems with bangs and loud noises. So as the staff is reviewing this, just be cognizant of the fact that rural areas are just as susceptible to misuse of fireworks as urban areas.
And that's been the problem with the lanterns as well, starting fires fast. So, do we have any other comments or questions? So if I could have a motion for deferral, moved by Councillor Howes, second by Bailey, for 1 or 2 seconds.
Yeah, we can try to. I think we'd like to wrap this up this year. We're kind of past fireworks season now; they're not for sale anymore. So we can try to wrap this up in the fall. So
okay. So we have a motion for deferral. Seconded. All in favor? Passed. Okay, 9.2, review and update of good forestry practices bylaw. Michelle Schaeffel. I'd like to make some comments, Michelle.
Good evening, everybody. I guess I'll just give a brief overview of the presentation. As most of you know, last year we passed the new good forestry practices bylaw aimed at improving forestry within the county, good forestry management practices, and to prevent clear cutting. Staff committed as part of that report back to council with an update on the bylaw, let you know how it's going. I also believe as part of any new bylaw, it's good to do a 1-year review. What's working, what's not working, do we need to do tweaks? So in terms of, I am proposing some minor amendments, and it's just to make sure that the bylaw is being implemented as intended, which is why I consider them minor. Some minor changes to the fee schedule as well. Currently, in terms of the study, the fee is based on the area of trees removed as opposed to the study requirements. And we've had some, I guess, proposals for removal of plantation that maybe wouldn't warrant a significant study. So basing, I guess, the fee based on, I guess, the time required to review. So in terms of the update, staff did conduct public outreach. We created a website and a county email specific to the tree bylaw. As part of an mail out on the official plan, which went to all residents in the county, we did promote the changes to the good forestry practices bylaw, so all county residents were notified. I think it has been going well in terms of the good forestry permits. We received 22 permits last year, and bylaw has reported that the process was a lot more efficient and they're seeing better quality applications. In terms of clear cutting applications, we only received 3 permits. The biggest issue has been incomplete submissions, the quality that's received. So we did update the online application form. So we propose to put that into the bylaw, just making it clear that everything that's listed in terms of the study is required unless otherwise waived by the county, just to make it go faster. In terms of where trees are removed through clear cutting, we do require replacement trees, and most owners have preferred to provide cash in lieu. And as a result of that, the Parks and Recreation Department will be able to use that money to plant trees in county-owned lands and parks, and to restore areas such as our enhanced Mount Pleasant Nature Park. We are proposing, and also since adoption of the bylaw, the county has created a new forestry technician position, which is intended to start in the near future, and that will help in terms of reviewing permits. In terms of the proposed changes, I do consider them minor. One of the biggest changes is the designated official. Currently, bylaw is managing the Good Forestry Practices bylaw, but with the Parks and Recreation having the new forestry position, as well as managing tree replacement, we thought it would be best under that department, and that way bylaw can focus on enforcement as opposed to administration. As noted, we're also looking to clarify the study requirements. In terms of the replacement rate ratio, we have proposed a 2-to-1 ratio. It's currently only under the definition, so it has been being missed. So just clarifying that. And one of the bigger changes, like the intent of the bylaw, it sets out that we want to prevent clear cutting, that we want, I guess, applications that are in line with the official plan, the growth plan, the provincial policy statement, so that we're not circumventing those policies. It seems like the intent is being overlooked. I've had inquiries, can I clear cut in a provincially significant wetland? So I really think it's important. I've added recognizing that not everybody's read the growth plan, it is quite restrictive and where you can do development or site alteration, and certainly not within significant natural area. So I have proposed to add a prohibited clear cutting areas such as wetlands or areas of natural and scientific interest to provide better protection, keeping in mind that someone could still apply for a good forestry practices permit. They just wouldn't be able to clear cut those areas. And we do have exemptions related to building permits as well as under the Planning Act. So that's basically the summary of changes, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So do we have some questions for Michelle? Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. My question is, when you were talking about most people give the cash in lieu of replanting. Sure, that allows us to plant trees elsewhere, but do we have to have that option in there? Why can't we just have it in the sense that if you cut them, you shall replace them? Because that way, to me, we're getting a replacement of at least some trees in the area where they've been clear cut.
And certainly it is an option. When I did the initial bylaw, I consulted with a number of municipalities. What were they doing for replacement trees? And the one thing that has occurred is people plant trees on their land, they get a permit, and then they rip them out. So as once you get into planting on land, you need agreements, you need securities, checks for 2 years, which is feasible, but I think a lot of owners find it expensive, and certainly on the one property that we had where they had cleared trees without a permit, we felt that it was extensive. They had to apply for a permit to add a driveway, so we had required as part of that permit that they replant the area. Because I thought, well, you didn't need to clear trees in the valley, so we did require that they replant on the subject lands, and that the bylaw currently allows 0.1 hectares. So we said you can have that cleared area, but you have to replant the extra amounts. And certainly if council wishes, we could consider that. I think in talking to a lot of municipalities, it was just a lot easier to implement. And then they got the money, and then they had better control that the trees, what they planted, and that the trees actually remained in place.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Michelle. What happens when people fail to comply with the bylaw and they take away trees that they shouldn't do?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Bell, we have had a number of complaints since launching the bylaw. We usually investigate it. Do they fall under exemption? In a lot of cases they have, or it's not considered a woodland under the bylaw, so it hasn't resulted in that. We did have one violation where, as I said, they had cleared about 0.6 hectares of land in advance of a building permit or getting a clear cutting permit. So bylaw went out, they inspected, I understand charges were laid, they had to do remediation works, and then when they applied for a permit, we made sure, and we have securities for that, to ensure that the replanting does occur. They are held on with the county for about 2 years, just to make sure, you want to make sure that the trees are well maintained, that they're healthy, and usually 2 years is a typical process for that timeline.
I think it is important that we have that proviso in our bylaw that when people fail to comply, that there is a recognised and known penalty ahead of time should they not comply.
Councillor Chambers and Councillor.
Again, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Michelle, in certain areas of the county, they are regulated by the conservation authorities, particularly Section 28. And I'm just wondering how this bylaw jives with the regulatory framework of conservation authorities under in the same properties. I can recall a time when there was an approval given by a conservation authority and a not approval given by the county. I'm not sure how that ever resolved itself, but what happens when one approves it, one doesn't, and how is that resolved through this bylaw in terms of precedence, in terms of working with the conservation authorities?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Chambers. Certainly there is a little bit of overlap. The conservation authorities regulate hazardous lands. It's been my experience that they mainly regulate development, structures, site alteration, but they don't, if a landowner was to remove vegetation or trees, they don't get involved. They don't consider that a violation. So that's where a bylaw is a little bit different than the conservation authorities in that we are regulating the natural heritage feature as opposed to the natural hazard. Any person they are required to comply with all applicable law, and if there are some times where they do receive a permit from GRCA and they think they've met everything. And in some cases where if there is a violation, the conservation authority, or even if the county branch found one, we're very good at communicating with one another in terms of, oh, we went in on site, we found this, just letting you know we got a complaint about tree removal. So GRCA might notify the county and then we would look into it, and vice versa.
Follow-up?
Yeah, just a follow-up. When we updated the forestry bylaw a short time ago, the conservation authorities were circulated for comment. Is that appropriate in this case? Was that done, or is that just something that would be a redundancy?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so as part of last year when I did the initial bylaw, I certainly consulted with Grand River Conservation Authority in Long Point. So the forester at GRCA actually reviewed the bylaw and provided some useful comments.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Michelle, and I apologize. I'm going to dive a bit into the weeds here. When we talk about a tree, I know when we mentioned the tree bylaw in the past, we would say it would have to be a certain height, a certain diameter. Is that still part of it or no? Or because like your definition of tree is any woody perennial that may reach a height of 4.5 meters.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Miller, you are correct. So it's any tree that has the potential to reach a maturity of 4.5 meters. So in talking to foresters, and it stems from the Forestry Act, most bylaws have the same definition. So you could consider, if you're dealing with a woodland area, you could consider a sapling, a tree, because it has the potential to reach a certain height of 4.5 meters. And if you look at the definition of woodlands and woodlots, it says if you have, say, so many trees over 20 centimeters in diameter, it's a woodland. If you have like any tree, like 1,000 trees, and it's measured over a hectare. So it bases it on the size of the trees and the number of trees, and that's how you determine what a woodland. So as part of one of it, it's any tree. So my understanding from foresters is that the interpretation is it could be a sapling because it has a potential to grow, but you would need to meet that density requirement to be considered a woodland or a woodlot.
Is a sumac a tree?
If it can grow to 4.5 meters, it's considered a tree.
Because I've seen, anyways, you see a lot of these stands of sumac, you know, just popping up, and I hate like heck to think that they would need an environmental plan. So, just to be clear, maybe you can confirm, staff has the option of, you know, saying we don't need an environmental impact study for this, whatever. Is that correct? You have the discretion, correct?
We have the discretion where they do need a permit. We would require what's at least an environmental implementation plan. So what are you removing? Why are you removing it? Do we need any protection measures? There is one exemption for agricultural land where it's become overgrown with trees that are less than 10 years old, such as sumac, where it's just kind of growing out. It's not really significant. It's not mature. That could be removed.
Because I hate to think someplace overgrown with sumac or poplars, or even a planted white pine, a stand of white pine, you know, that was planted 4 years ago, is treated the same as a mature Carolinian forest. So I just, I'd like to see, like I say, a little bit of discretion on the part of staff, you know, as far as implementing some of these permits.
Yeah, yes, and that's certainly where we have a case where on agricultural land, there is a plantation, it's next to woodland, but doesn't need a complete environmental impact study. No, and it's all the same type of tree. So that's where we've looked at kind of opening up the provisions. So we do have an exemption where land has been previously cleared as part of an agricultural operation, which has become overgrown with young early successional tree species, sumac, hawthorn, that are less than 10 years. So there is an exemption provided for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? We do have a recommendation. Do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Ferrier, seconded by Councillor Pierce. Any other last minute comments? Okay, all those in favor? Pass. Okay, 9.3, site alteration bylaw update. Don Cunningham. Would like to speak to that, Don? You're online.
Hopefully everybody can hear me.
I think you're good. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'll just keep it brief as to the executive summary in that I think committee's been waiting for this report for a while. It's 2019 is when we were looking at having this updated, and various delays, including COVID-19, we weren't able to get here, but we are now. So again, this report overviews the bylaw update process undertaken and the revisions to the bylaw based on comments we've received from the following public engagement, stakeholder comments, and recent changes to provincial legislation. And as well, one of the important things in here that we have is that we're asking for the creation of a site alteration reserve, and that's in discussions with our finance department that it probably was an oversight with the first reiteration of the site alteration bylaw, but I'd like to have that established. So I'm open to questions.
We have some questions for Don. We don't have no questions. Oh, Councillor Chambers.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I guess the question of the day would be in terms of site alteration. What's the deal on played out gravel pits accepting fill and from all over the countryside on a regular basis, 24/7, and we seem to be powerless to regulate that. I'm just wondering, why is that? I think I know the answer, but maybe you could just elaborate a little bit.
So if they are in a gravel pit that's handed in their license, and there's this bylaw here actually speaks to that's a prohibited activity, because we're not looking to have it should have been completed as per their license, their aggregate license, and we're not looking to have them alter any of those pits that were that had a previous pit license. So ones that do have one under the Aggregate Resources Act, they're mandated by that. So site alteration permits are not for in that vein, and I think we have an example of one of those in our area. But again, this bylaw here update prohibits that occurring. I don't know if I've answered the question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the question was, does this apply to rehabilitation projects in an existing licensed pit? I think that was the question. If Councillor Chambers is nodding. Don, I believe the answer is no, the bylaw does not apply to a licensed aggregate operation. That falls under provincial regulation. I think we've had a multitude of reports on that over the last 10 years here. So.
Okay. Yes, that's correct. Through you, Mr. Chair, I can read a portion of it. It's under 3.113, and it says it's for prohibited areas. The following are prohibited areas under the areas unless approval by the director is obtained. Lands previously licensed or permitted and used as a pit or a quarry under the Aggregate Resource Act as amended, or any predecessor legislation thereof, or otherwise, whether such lands have been rehabilitated or not. So hopefully that's the section that we're referring to if it has a surrendered pit license.
Do we have any other questions for Don? We have a recommendation. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor Bell. All those in favor? Pass. So staff reports 9.1. Firework. 9.4. RPT 025122 Council Remuneration Update. Heather Boyd.
Good evening, through the chair. So the consultant has presented her results of the council remuneration comparative group study. My staff report is in front of you. It's intended to capture the recommendations from the consultant and also discussions that we had at our last session. I'm here to answer any questions or provide clarification. I did do a quick analysis on Councillor Miller's question about the per resident cost. I can advise that for the comparative group, they vary very much widely. I don't think it's a reliable source of making a determination as to what the remuneration should be. For the mayor, it was from 77 cents per resident to 275 per resident. And from councillor, it varied from 250 per resident to 975 per resident. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. And we are about in the middle of each of those groups. So I'll leave it at that.
We have some questions for Heather. Well, we do have a recommendation before us. We have a mover and a second to bring it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Councillor House. Is there any comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor of the recommendation? Any opposed? Seeing none, it is passed. Thanks. (9.5) Update on the county brand purchasing bylaw. Al Rose.
Thank you. The county has taken an opportunity to update the current purchasing policy, which was put into effect in 2013 and was in need of a refresh. This update addresses new legislation such as the new trade agreements, the Construction Act, and wording to match our electronic bidding platform. We have also put forward a monetary change for council approval. This change brings the county more in line with surrounding municipalities and the current market conditions. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, we'll take them.
We have some questions. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question just about the trade agreements, because I was on council when CETA went through, and there was a lot of hubbub, a lot of ado made about because one of the particulars in that agreement was they could reach in and start bidding on municipal purchasing. But never been an issue as far as you know, for us or for any other municipality that you're aware of.
The chair, through you, we've only had one fall under the CETA where we have had an overseas company bid on it. And there have not been any issues.
Because they did it go well. Okay, no issues. Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you. Through you to the presenter. I'm very supportive of the idea of raising the limits for having our staff make the decisions rather than council make decisions. I think giving a little bit more freedom to staff, I think, is the appropriate thing to do. The quid pro quo, if you like, is can we see an annual review of those larger decisions made by staff that would typically have been made by council? Just an annual review, just come and say, this is what we did, it only happened 5 times, this is what it was for. It just builds confidence, and I'm absolutely certain it's the right thing to do, but this is an intermediate step. And in the second point, on section 4 of the bylaw, it talks about performance evaluation. Can again we see an annual review of the performance evaluations at council? The reason I ask that is quite often we get people coming along recommended for approval of a tender, and we often ask the question, have they done work at the county before? And typically it's when it's a large sum. And I think if we were a bit more familiar with some of the contractors that we work with, that would make it so much easier for us as council to be supportive. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Bell, we certainly can do, we'll do a summary report every 6 months or so outlining the 100,000 to 250 decisions that have been made. We can certainly do that. On the other piece, we are working with purchasing and operations, trying to come up with a more fulsome evaluation process. There's a couple things that they're looking at. It just wasn't quite ready in time for this process. We haven't done a ton of them, but we would like to strengthen up our process overall and make it a little more stringent.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for that. I mean, when I worked in industry, it was typically something we would do. And it allowed us to have an understanding of who the better contractors were and who the less good contractors were, and it just sharpens the discussion. Thank you.
Any other questions? So we have a recommendation for us. We have a mover and a second. Moved by Mayor Bailey, second by Councillor Wheat. All those in favor? Approved. We've moved that. Oh, do you want to come? Oh, okay. So we've moved the communication earlier, and we have the Chief Administrator's update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. I just have a few things to update on. First thing I'd note is that we have 2 education sessions planned for next week at the Administration Operations Committee. I think I did speak about one already a few months ago, but that's on rural settlement boundaries, and we have a good presentation on that. We're also going to do a short information session on enforcement and legal matters related to the development process. That came from a question that came out last week, I believe, and I thought it was a good time because there are a few questions going around. I think it helped council to understand what that process is. There's a lot of legality to that process. It's complicated, and I thought it would be good for council to have a brush up. So Pam and Jody are working on that, and they're going to have, I think, a good, short, but concise and meaningful presentation on that topic. So I did ask the clerk a couple weeks ago to seek a delegation with the MTO at the upcoming AMO conference regarding the ongoing challenges related to the deployment of automated speed enforcement. So council's had a few reports on this over the last couple of years. We are due for another report. I would just remind council that some of what we are dealing with ASC has contractual obligations, so it's a complicated discussion to get into tonight. But I did want you to let you know that we are continuing to face hurdles and impediments to that process. And I felt that it was time that maybe we got in front of the minister. So I think right at the deadline of the minister's delegation request, I asked the clerk to get in on to make a request to MTO so we could get in front of them, because I think some of these hurdles could be easily cleared up for a municipality like us, and there's a few others. We've actually built for lack of a better term, a bit of a support group, Adam and I, with some other municipalities in Ontario, all sharing the same frustrations on fairly minor things that we should be able to clear out and move this tool into our communities, because it's a good tool that I think all of us would like to see deployed. So I just wanted to let you know that if we get that delegation, hopefully we can make some progress with the minister. I think most of council is aware that there are some big challenges right now being faced by the healthcare system, especially around emergency care. And our paramedic service is right in the midst of that situation. And we are facing fairly significant, historically significant offload delays with the paramedic services at emergency departments right now. And we're not alone. This is a system-wide problem. So Chief King and I took some initiative and proactively convened a meeting with the executive team at the Brant Community Healthcare System, the BGH, last week. We had actually what I thought was a very productive discussion. And the focus of the discussion was twofold. It was first on how do we get our paramedic crews back on the road as quickly as possible so they can serve the community, as opposed to looking after patients in a hallway at the BGH. And the second thing was how do we better utilize our paramedics to provide care out there in the community and maybe help keep people out of the emergency rooms. So I'm not an expert on these things. A lot of the discussion was certainly very technical in nature, but I think the participation between our two groups was very strong. And we have several working groups between the two teams now that are looking at some different options, which I'm sure we'll be expounding on these options as they come to fruition with Paramedic Services Committee, and you'll see those in the reports. But I did want council to know that this is not something we're just taking on sitting down. We are active, and we're looking for solutions with our partners at the BGH to get our paramedics back out into the community where I think they're best serving the members of our community. So, on the note of paramedic services, we started the paramedic services budget. We had our first management review of the budget last week, and we have a second review next week, and we will be presenting that budget to Paramedic Services Committee, I think in the first week of August, and then it'll come to council likely in September, according to our Paramedic Services Agreement. And finally, I just wanted to mention that I think probably one of the last orders of business of this council before the 2022 election will be to approve a orientation program for the next council. And so the clerk and the general manager of corporate services and myself will be sitting down later this month to start to put some structure around that orientation program. And then you'll see a report, probably one of your last meetings in September. So if there's any feedback that individual councilors have on what we could have done better, or some areas of orientation that you thought maybe we didn't cover or could be covered, or some evolving business that you think time on, we'd appreciate that feedback. I think Ms. Boyd would be the contact for that feedback. We'd welcome it so we can actually start to put structure around that program for the next council. That's my update, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Michael? Councilor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Michael. Michael, do we know how the wait times are for our ambulances are versus other municipalities? And I know it's not a direct orange to orange comparison because it isn't, but any ideas how it ranks, how we rank?
Sure, Mr. Chair. I looked at some data, and it is hard to compare apples to oranges on this. I mean, I think one of our wait times are definitely compare low to a broader group of hospitals, but noting that Brant only has one hospital, and a lot of comparable sized areas have 2 or 3. Guelph, for example, Wellington has several hospitals, and we only have one. So that compounds our problem. There's just less hospital real estate in our area for our population than a lot of it. So it's not really, I don't think we can blame that on our hospital system. It's just a fact of real estate. But we are certainly I don't want to say underserved, but we have definitely a service gap, if you will, in our hospital system locally, which then impacts our paramedic service. So that requires us to field additional resources to kind of buttress up that gap. So
We're in camera to have some other comments, but I'll leave that for now. By law, they'd have to take them to the BGH, correct? They can't say go to the Willet emergency if it's open.
So three, Mr. Chair. So the Willet has urgent care. We actually have had some discussions with the hospital about whether we can transfer a low acuity patient to the Willet, and that's actually one of the areas that we're going to work on. You know, even if we do a couple of those a day, we could free up a couple of ambulances. Now, the challenge to that is, and it was made clear that the Willet also has capacity issues. It's also running at probably well over its available capacity for service. So you know, it's a challenge. Now, if we get into serious offload problems, we can move patients within our system into adjacent hospitals, Woodstock or Norfolk. That's usually a conversation that the service has with the emergency room director, and then they can authorize some transfers to other hospitals.
Yeah, I realize it's going to be a multifaceted answer, but thank you for those 2 specific questions.
Do we have any other questions? Councillor Chambers.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Michael, you had mentioned and alluded to the fact that the council meeting in September will be the last council meeting. I'm just wondering if you could just, maybe for my benefit and maybe the benefit of others, in terms of being a lame duck council, what can and can't be done in the meeting of September? Is this going to be maybe you can comment on that?
Sure, Mr. Chair, through you, and I can't remember the specific. As I recall, there's 4 things that a lame duck council can't do, and a lame duck council is when, is it more than, Heather, help me with this, more than?
So there's a, hello? Okay. There is a threshold amount in terms of expenditure. You can spend over that, but it has to be within the budget. So it's just a matter of unbudgeted expenditures. There's some limits on. There's the hiring and firing of officers. I think that's the 2 big ones that come in. There is a report coming next week that kind of lays out everything in terms of the lame duck provisions. Alicia has drafted that for next week's committee consideration.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, to the clerk, while I'm on that subject of the last council meeting, which would be in September, just playing out the timeline, the last regular council meeting will be in September, and then the next council meeting, if I understand the process, will be the inaugural meeting?
Yes.
And then after the inaugural meeting would be the first regular meeting of the new council?
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that there's a little bit of a glitch in terms of tradition and protocols, in that we've usually had a meeting after the election of the outgoing council. which affords the opportunity for the members who aren't returning to perhaps receive comments from their colleagues, thanking, et cetera, and perhaps giving them the opportunity to address council and the public for the last time. That won't happen under our schedule, which I think is unfortunate for the people who will not be returning. For example, if I don't return, I won't know that in September, and then after September, I'll never be seen again. and I won't have the opportunity to thank my colleagues. I think that would be a shame. So I'm wondering if staff through the clerk's office can devise something perhaps at the first regular meeting of the new council to maybe invite, and this is a suggestion, to invite the councilors who won't be returning under presentation or something to that effect, to give them the opportunity to speak, knowing that they done a good job, and perhaps if you're unelected or lose an election, thank the, etc. That'll be an opportunity for that to happen, which I think needs to be somehow in the system. And the other thing too, and some of you will remember this, if councillors will not be returning, there was always a presentation. They always got to take their pen set and got to shake the mirror, et cetera. That kind of thing, I think, is tradition. I think it needs to continue, and we maybe need to set a new tradition. But I would not. I think it would be a good idea to for councillors who aren't returning to receive something in terms of recognition for their service and time well spent. I'll leave that with staff.
Mr. Chair, for sure, I think that's and I think that what's changed this year is that the Municipal Act changed and it moved the inaugural meeting up to November 15th as opposed to it used to be December 1st. So we actually always had time to do a full committee cycle after the election, which was fine. It allowed us to keep doing a little bit of business, and it did allow that kind of that celebratory moment at the last council meeting where the outgoing council could reflect on its past 4 years. So I think if you can leave that with us, we could look at one option could be to have a special meeting, if that would be allowable. I'm not sure, but we could discuss that. Or as you say, we could have in one of the earlier meetings, we could have a bit of a celebratory moment for the previous members of council. So we can leave that with us. We've got a report, I think, coming next week, and we probably could address that next week if we need.
Councillor LaFerre.
Yeah, just to clarify, we're still in office. I guess I'm speaking for me as the only one knowing he's not coming back. We're still in office until November 14th. So we could hold like a November 1st special meeting just for that purpose of getting together one last time, having a hands in or something to that effect. But just to have that closure celebration and thank yous to the community. Yeah. That to me would be the preference, as opposed to that first meeting of council. There'll be a lot of people here wanting to see and don't want to have like who sits where, and also sometimes there's bad feelings with people lose and people win, and there's some of that too that I think would be sort of insensitive or could lead to it feeling insensitive.
Any other questions or comments? Thanks very much for the update, Michael. So under other business, David, you have?
I do, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. I want to talk about the fire chief. We have an interim fire chief. And the fire chief, if you read through all the municipal stuff, does a lot or has a lot of roles. If you read Greg's report tonight, I think the fire chief was mentioned a few times there. They have a role with emergency management. I'm just wondering, is there anything that we're aware of that a fire chief should do in their role that an interim fire chief could not do? Or could they just do everything?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I believe we have to appoint a fire chief, and it has to be appointed by bylaw. you know, whether it's an interim acting fire chief or a full-time fire chief, I think is immaterial to that. So we have to appoint a fire chief. So we have done that. Darren Watson, who's the deputy chief, has been appointed as fire chief, and he is right now on a staff level acting fire chief. So I can just let council know we've met with the district chiefs. Usually when we start, you know, if we have a chief retire or leave, our first order of business is to connect with the district chiefs, because they you know, they run fire suppression operations in our community, and our fire chief's job is to support them. So we usually want them on board with our approaches. We had a good discussion with them about what our future approach with the fire chief's position will be, and we'll be connecting with them over the next few months to determine our next steps.
Well, at this point, we haven't posted for a new fire chief at this point.
Through you, Mr. No, we've appointed Darren as acting fire chief, and that's our strategy for the present, to basically to leave him in the role for the time being, and continue to basically dialogue with the district chiefs on what our next steps will be. So,
as a member of this council, I will direct what I normally would direct to the fire chief to Darren until told otherwise.
Any other questions or comments? So seeing none, I don't believe we have anything in camera. Mayor Bailey. There's nothing in camera. No. And we have a motion for adjournment, which I believe we just had. Okay, we stand adjourned. Thanks.